So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming to tonight's installment of our Follow the River lecture series, sponsored by Rondout Savings Bank, hosted by the Hudson River Maritime Museum. My name is Erin Boss. I work as the Education Program Manager at the Maritime Museum, and I'd like to start out with a couple thank yous. Thank you so much to Leslie Drojak, our intrepid volunteer who is a permanent installment as our lecture series, who helped get you checked in. Thank you so much to Jack Loesch, our museum educator, who helped me set up tonight. And thank you so much to Carla Lesh, who will be taking on hosting the lectures for the rest of this season. Carla is our archivist and digital collections manager. Before we begin, can I please ask you to go ahead and please turn your cell phones to silent? I know that we live in the age of technology, so I really appreciate you just checking on those. And just some logistical information, please make note of the multiple exits of the building. Of course, you can exit the way that you came in. There's another exit to the side. There are other exits down the hallway. Down the hallway, to the back and to my left, to your right from the direction you're sitting, you'll also find restrooms if you need to use the restroom at any point this evening. Please continue to help yourself to refreshments. We have some fresh coffee brewing right now and some cookies and snacks and water for you as well. The Hudson River Maritime Museum is a 501c3 not-for-profit. We do not receive funds except from government, state or federal, except for periodic and competitive project-based grants. We thank Rondout Savings Bank for their sponsorship of the lecture series. And we also thank you all for your support of the museum. Again, please note that we are video recording the introduction that I'll give of Michael Keene tonight. We will not video record the documentary itself, since we want to make sure that Michael's work stays under his control. But then we'll resume recording at the end when we'll do a live Q&A with Mike via Zoom here. I also just want to plug, we do have a few upcoming lectures. We have 2 upcoming lectures in August. On Tuesday, August 6th, which is a little weird. We usually do our lectures on Wednesdays. We'll be hosting the Director of Education for Discovering Amistad, Chris Menapace, presenting the lecture New York and the Amistad Rebellion of 1839, coinciding with the visit of the schooner Amistad to the Hudson River Maritime Museum stocks. And then on August 14th, we'll have our usual Follow the River lecture series installment. We'll host Professor Stephen Shimrick for his lecture, Geology and History of the Rosendale Natural Cement Industry. This evening's lecture, The Psychic Highway, How the Erie Canal Changed America, is presented by Michael Keene, joining us on Zoom. We'll begin by screening that 30-minute documentary, and then we'll bring Mike back up on the screen for a live Q&A. Michael T. Keene is the author of 8 books about unusual but true stories. Along with his documentary film, The Psychic Highway, Keene is also the producer of the documentary video Visions, True Stories of Spiritualism, Secret Societies, and Murder, as well as 8 audiobooks. Although employed for more than 25 years as a financial advisor, Keene has combined his interest in local history, writing, music, and filmmaking to explore unique and fascinating chapters of 19th century New York folklore and stranger-than-life legends. The events that bubbled out of this period included the anti-Masonic movement, the origins of the modern spiritualist and paranormal movements, and the women's rights and anti-slavery movements, as well as the founding of 7 new religions and utopian communes. What began as a hobby 12 years ago has now become a grand obsession. So, Michael, I'll minimize your Zoom screen, but I know that you'll be here. I'm going to attempt to share my screen so you have just a sense of where we are at in your documentary. We'll pause the recording, and we'll go ahead and start screening Mike's documentary, which is available on YouTube via a private link that he has sent me. Great, Mike, we're going to bring you back with us. I'm going to invite you to unmute yourself, if I can figure out how to do that.
I think I did.
You sure did. Yes, we can hear you. So I think the best way to do this is that I'm going to shuttle the microphone around the room as you all have questions. I would also like to reverse the camera just so that Mike can kind of see the audience. So it'll be like he's here with us. So again, this is being recorded. This portion will be recorded. And so you're welcome to move to the back if you're uncomfortable with that, but you are all a very beautiful crowd. So I'll go ahead.
Crowd. Yep, good looking.
Let me go ahead and adjust this camera and give me just a moment to do so. All right, Mike, does that look good to you?
Looks good to me.
Great. So I'll go ahead and would someone like to ask the first question? I'll bring the mic to you.
I just like his original inspiration, not a question, but original inspiration.
Great. Yeah, Jude says that she likes your original inspiration. Yeah, I can go ahead and ask the first question. So, Mike, you're zooming in from Arizona, is that correct?
Actually, about 20 miles outside of Las Vegas,
Okay, so Nevada.
Nevada, right.
And so my question for you is what prompted you to become so inspired about the Erie Canal and New York State to write this book and then adapt it into this 30-minute documentary?
Right. Well, I'm a lifelong New Yorker until about 6 years ago when we moved out here. Although we enjoyed paying the high property taxes in New York and we really liked the winter weather, we decided that we'd move to Nevada where they don't have a state income tax, by the way. But living in New York, we lived specifically in Pittsford, in a village called Bushnell Basin. And Bushnell Basin is located right on the Erie Canal. I can't tell you the number of hours that I spent bicycling and walking along the Erie Canal. And although in my first book, Folklore and Legends of Rochester, The Mystery of Hoodoo Corner, I had written about the Erie Canal, kind of in the typical way it's usually written about, more of as a waterway rather than as an information superhighway. And one day I was doing what I normally was doing at that time, walking down the Erie Canal, and I don't know why, but I suddenly thought about the people who traveled down the canal in the packet boats. And I began to do a deep dive, as they say, into New York history and learned that in just a 30-year period, in a 30-mile area, the most significant religious, political, and social movements ever established in the country in the 19th century had as their origins along the Erie Canal. And so that's when I began to learn about Frederick Douglass, Susan B. Anthony, Charles Finney, Joseph Smith. I mean, you can go on and on and on. And so that's where my inspiration came from, to learn what I could and say, you know what? Maybe there's more to this Erie Canal than we maybe have given it credit for. And because it now became a way for people to travel more easily. And as Thomas Jefferson said, you mean to tell me you're going to create a 368-mile long waterway through the wilderness? You have to be mad. And I guess in a way they were. And look what came as the result. And so that was what inspired me, and hopefully it came through in the video. But thanks for that question, by the way.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. Back to you all. Who would like to ask the next question?
Hi there. Could
Hi.
you talk a little bit about how the canal was used in the Underground Railroad?
Well, sure. I mean, runaway slaves basically began migrating north. Many ended up going to Canada, and the use of the Erie Canal was not as important. But there were many who came literally using the Erie Canal as a form of transportation in order to get to, well, at the end of the canal, the Buffalo area, and to then go north from there into Canada. Harriet Tubman, and you have to admire her and other folks who were in the forefront of this, the Underground Railroad. And I don't think the Erie Canal has been given much credit for this. There's many stops along the way, houses that were used as safe houses for runaway slaves, but that the Erie Canal, for the reasons that commerce boomed in New York State during this period because of the ability to transfer goods rapidly, considering how they had been transferred in the past. This before the major railroads had been constructed. And as the video indicated, the price of goods, the transportation of which dropped 90%. And so it also became the manner in which people were able to move about. And that was the same as with runaway slaves, and using and having the part of the Erie Canal used essentially as part of the Underground Railroad. I enjoyed that part. You know, the Sojourner Truth speech, "Ain't I a Woman?" I indicated in the video, I thought that was not only a great speech having to do with the women's movement, but probably one of the great speeches of all time. And what she had to relate, and that being, and by the way, if you want to really get into the weeds here a little bit, read a little bit about Susan B. Anthony and other women who were at the forefront of the women's rights movement, and actually some conflict that they had with the abolitionist movement. Things were not always so rosy, and that was one of the reasons that Sojourner Truth was not being gladly accepted into the fold, because they looked at her as being an abolitionist, not as a woman's rights advocate. And of course, her speech, "Ain't I a Woman?" explains all that.
Thank you. I'll come to the back and then I'll pop up here.
Thank you. When the railroads came along.
When did they?
When the railroads came along, did they completely kill all of the economic benefits of the canal system? Or did the canal system retain some economic benefits?
I think that's a great question. Well, in terms of the transportation of goods, railroads certainly replaced most of what the Erie Canal was able to achieve. But the Erie Canal then became, and which is now what it is a great, I call it like an outdoor park and library. If you walk along the Erie Canal, and they have these signs, historic signs telling you where you are, what part of the canal system you're in, and what are some of the events. It now has become a recreational area, and that has brought its own economic development. I think I might have had this in the video, but for the longest time, they charge tolls on the Erie Canal, and it came as kind of it was kind of fun to learn that the New York State Thruway system was actually in control of the Erie Canal for many, many years. And of course, as of somebody who is, and I've put many miles on the New York State Thruway system and had paid my share of tolls. It's just funny to think that it kind of makes sense that the Erie Canal also charged tolls, and it was the New York State Thruway system which managed the Erie Canal. So there is an economic development or aspect to the Erie Canal now, not like it was before the advent of the railroad, certainly, but it's now kind of morphed into, again, recreation. You know what I'm interested in is why you folks are interested in the Erie Canal. The Erie Canal doesn't come down to where you are, correct? No.
So it meets the Hudson River north of Albany.
Right.
Is it Waterford? Is that correct, folks?
Right. I'm curious, how many there with a raise of hands, show of hands, have been on the, the Erie Canal, one way or another? So many of you, okay. I knew I saw some of you there.
I'll hand off for the next question for you.
This is really a non-trivial issue when you mention the great Sojourner Truth. She began her life only a few hundred yards from where we're sitting in Esopus. The house still stands, which was called the Jug Tavern, where she was an enslaved young girl named Wilhelmina. That was her Dutch name at her point of origin. So that building was finally discovered and identified definitely less than a decade ago as being the place where she began her life as an enslaved child. And
Right.
then on the story evolved from there. So it's a non-trivial issue. I hope it helps to enliven what you were just saying about her and her speech. The only other thing, just very, very briefly, the railroad industry actually operated up and down the Hudson proper, lots of barge trains. And there has to have been some movement of goods, even during the railroad era, in which from our Atlantic ports in New York City and adjacent New Jersey, and the interior, there continued to roll. And of course, you know that some parts of the historic hand-dug canal were replaced by the so-called barge canal. So
Right.
it is a complex but very interesting history in that respect.
Thank you.
Good question there. I was going to invite your commentary.
Mike, do you have commentary on that?
I mean, think about it. The major railroad at that point in time ran parallel to the Erie Canal. And it just occurred to me that how could the Erie Canal maybe supplement the railroad system? And we have that today. I was thinking, Amazon just had its Prime Day, I think yesterday. Amazon sold $17 billion worth of goods in one day. It defies. They're just incredible. But the thing with Amazon, like perhaps the thing back then, was that you could get the major parts of goods by train, but you still needed a last mile to get it to particular places. It would not have been economically efficient to have a train doing that. So, yeah, I think the relationship between the railroad system and the canal system for a while was an interesting one for sure.
Thank you. I think Meg will be next for a question.
I really appreciate your insight as the fact that the canal was not just a route of transportation of goods, but a transportation of information. I just wanted to know if you have any idea of how it impacted the postal system, how much more quickly mail was able to move from one point to another.
Well, in a way, and I've tried to be able to put that in the simplest terms. There, and I indicated the wilderness, the sheer inability to move at all from Albany to Buffalo. There was nothing there. It was wilderness. There were some smaller villages that began to come about. Most of the major highways, certainly in the greater Rochester area, and I'm sure this is true across the state of New York, all began as Native American footpaths. And there was a reason for it. And in fact, the New York State Thruway at one point. Now, it wasn't just somebody, flipped a coin and decided they were going to build the highway there. A lot of that had been discovered hundreds, 1,000 years before. And I did some research on Indian footpath that later on became trails that a horse could transfer somebody. And then after a while, it would be widened, so horse and wagons. And at that point, it became a little bit easier to move about. The packet boats, I mean, this is just an estimate, but they would move. And of course, you had the lock system, which kind of slowed things down, but made it enabling people to be able to go from one end of the canal, or one end from Albany to Buffalo, that you could move about 3 to 4 miles an hour. Now, in today's world, when we zip along, at 70, and it's always amazed me. I mean, when people left the East Coast to go out west, how long that took.
Yeah.
You're doing a mile an hour. But so the canal, in a sense, and again, to quantify, it's maybe a little bit difficult, but had to be a factor of 5, maybe a factor of 10, faster. It was a much more direct system than certainly a horse and a wagon.
Thank you.
Hi, I just have a quick question. I know where we are in the roundup, we're at the beginning of the Delaware and Hudson Canal. And they talk about the Delaware and Hudson Canal, and the reason it was built was to bring the coal out of Pennsylvania. Is there a specific goods, we keep saying goods, that were brought on the Erie Canal? Is there a specific reason for goods? Was it farm goods? Or was it just bringing population out to settle the western state? What exactly were the goods?
Right. So yes, you had farm goods, but you also had textiles. It was interesting to learn that clothing that was manufactured in Europe could now be sold to people who lived in Chicago because of the Erie Canal. So, and in fact, the part about Joseph Smith and the establishment of the printing press in Palmyra and the publication of the Book of Mormon, that they had to get that printing press to Palmyra, and which would have been virtually impossible, even though they broke it down into its smaller parts, to have done it any other way. And so in a way, certain political, religious, and social movements began to come about because of the Erie Canal, and just the sheer fact that not only goods could be transported, but all manner of ideas. And I think when I looked at what made the Erie Canal perhaps most important, I think that has to be put into the conversation.
Very good.
Thank you.
I have one other.
Follow-up question.
It's not really a question. I know I grew up in Brooklyn, and my dad would always say Flatbush Avenue was the Native American path from downtown Brooklyn out to the ocean.
Right.
So
It's true. It's true.
Example. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's at one point that was the only folks who lived there.
Right.
Next question, I'll come to the back.
Would the Underground Railroad be mostly on the western end of the Erie Canal?
If you wouldn't mind bringing it really close to the microphone. No, just bring it close to you. It's on.
I think I missed one.
No, it was on.
No.
Here.
Did you hear it or not?
I'm not, okay, so where was in terms of the Underground Railroad, which part of the Erie Canal was, I don't know exactly, but if I use Harriet Tubman, and Harriet Tubman's house is in Auburn, New York, And so one that would lead me to believe that the most important route of of the Underground Railroad and the use of the Erie Canal probably been more in the eastern part, certainly coming up perhaps the Hudson River and then heading west. Um, the part about the Underground Railroad, though, that the entire canal would have been used, but my research has indicated that it's probably more in the eastern part of the canal.
Side comment that I think is a new thing this year is that a company called Pocono Whitewater out of Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, is
Yeah.
advertising a 194-mile bike ride on the Erie Canal. Must go from Lockport almost to Albany, or maybe at least pass through Syracuse. And I don't know.
I think there's a bike trip that goes the entire length of the Erie Canal, isn't there? It leaves Buffalo, and I think it goes east. I think it goes the entire 360 some odd mile route. Not all the inlets and whatnot, but I think there's a bike ride that uses the entire length of the Erie Canal. Sounds like fun.
It's supposed to be a 6-day trip, and I imagine it's somewhere around Utica, Rome, but I'm thinking they will stop at the Yellow Bushnell's Basin restaurant.
Right. Well, you want to go?
I don't have the ability.
Well, neither do I. That's why I'm out here. In fact, when I'm done here, I'm going into my pool. You know, right now, I was telling Aaron, today it was 108. Last week, it hit 117. Actually, Las Vegas, we're 20 miles from Vegas. And because they lie in a valley, they're always warmer there than we are here. So they hit 119 about, I think, 2 weeks, almost 2 weeks in a row. So, but we're only 107, 108 today. It's very pleasant. I'm still going into my pool, though. By the way, you guys, I've given this presentation in person without the videos when I lived in New York, and I've done the Zoom business a number of times, and you're really the best audience. You should give yourself a round of applause. Really, you've asked great questions.
Other questions, we still have some time if you are curious about other things. All right, final call, and then we'll release Mike to his pool. Oh, we have a final question up here.
You hear okay? I found a pretty good history. I thought most of the executions for Governor
Could you speak up just a little bit?
Clinton's ditch. I thought he was the main guy, so he seemed to, in my mind, steal most of the credit.
I didn't quite catch that. Could you?
Oh, Governor Clinton.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I thought Governor Clinton has been given most of the credit for the Erie Canal. So
I think you would have to do that. Yeah, he was the visionary. Thomas Jefferson, who was great at a lot of things, thought it was madness. Nobody could do it. He thought it would take 100 years. And you know, when you think about it, they dug this thing in 7 years. I give the example when I used to live in New York, we're in Rochester. There was a stretch of road that ran through the center of Rochester. It was called Lake Avenue. And they entered into about a period of widening the streets, well, actually just repaving the streets, but widening the sidewalks. This was a 2-mile area. It took them 2.5 years to repave and widen the sidewalks. And it took these people only 7 years to dig a 363-mile canal. So a little bit different back then versus now.
Thank you. So last call for questions for Mike. All right, we've got another one for you, Mike.
Was any slaves involved in this?
In terms of working on the canal,
Yeah,
not that I'm aware of. Again, in the video, I mentioned the Irish were principally the laborers, although the Italians, because of their work as masons in the late 19th century, when you had large Italian immigration into the United States, they also worked on the canal. But the Irish, if you know, in fact, one of my other books and my other videos is called Abandoned, the Untold Story of the Orphan Trains. A lot of people are shocked to learn that over 250,000 orphan children, speaking of trains, were taken by train out to the Midwest to live with farming families. And the reason for that initially was when you had the Great Potato Famine in Ireland. Well, they had potato famines almost all the time, but in 1847, 1848, nearly 1 million Irish died from hunger and disease, and nearly another 1 million Irish emigrated to the United States. This is before Ellis Island, and they came to the United States. And if you've seen the movie The Gangs of New York, which takes place when the Irish are coming in 1860s, they were immediately conscripted to fight in the Civil War. They didn't even know they had done that, but they became the cheap labor to build the canal. Now, could there have been a slave? I mean, you couldn't rule that out. But New York abolished slavery, I think, in 1817, which would have been the first year of the beginning of the construction of the canal. It doesn't seem like there would have been.
Well, thank you all so much for your questions. Was there a final question over here or no? Thank you all so much for your questions. Let's give a round of applause for Michael Keene. Mike, thank you so much for joining us. You are free to go for a swim.
I'm going. Okay, bye now. Thank you.
And thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Please help yourself to refreshments to go, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you.